Boomcast. Ladies and gentlemen, if there are any gentlemen among you, or ladies for that matter, people, welcome to the show. I'm your host, John Wesley Norton, and today there is a special guest on the program, Mr. Larry Thomas. He's a well-respected and hard-working actor, best known for playing the iconic role of the Soup Nazi on one of television's most popular shows ever, SEINFELD. We have a very interesting discussion about his career and navigating Hollywood in general. So, without further ado, Mr. Larry Thomas. Larry Thomas, how are you today, sir?
I am very good, John. How are you?
Good. Yeah, it's a beautiful day here in the suburbs of Chicago. Where are you coming to us from?
I'm coming to you from Pittsburgh, PA, where it's also a beautiful day here. So I wonder what it's like in Los Angeles in my condo where my cat is enjoying a nice 78 degrees air conditioning for the past week. I forgot to turn it up. So she's just in the lap of luxury.
You do a lot of traveling, Larry. It seems like
I do.
Yeah.
I used to do it out of complete necessity. You know, I mean, when we made our films together, and I was doing lots of signings and things like that. But I started collecting Social Security last October, and my SAG pension, such as it is. And I sort of went hey, I'm going to, relax and not travel and whatever. And God, after a month or so, I just got so bored that people started, offering me signings and stuff. And I would say, yeah, sure, I'd love to. I mean, the only caveat of all that is the airlines have sort of decided that they don't have to keep any kind of schedules anymore. They don't have to get you where you want to go anymore. You know what I mean? All bets are off and I'm talking about American, Southwest, all the good ones. And they just cancel flights. Oh, we can't find a pilot. We don't have a crew. You guys are sleeping in Charlotte Airport overnight. We'll get you out at 9 a.m. Then this is commonplace now.
Sometimes I lay awake at night if I can't sleep, and I'll just scroll through YouTube and watch some videos. And some of my favorite to watch are the freak out videos in airports. I love that stuff. I don't know why. It's sad that people are driven to such extremes because of but I do not like to fly. I mean, if I would rather drive 10, 12 hours than fly somewhere.
I know. At least you'll get where you're going.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, I hear you, I mean, and with all the things you do, particularly I'm interested in the convention circuit. And of course, for those of you who are just joining us, which is all of you, Larry, of course, played the iconic Soup Nazi character on Seinfeld. I do want to go through how that came about eventually, but that is one of the reasons Larry is asked to travel so frickin' much around the country. But I'm particularly interested in the convention circuit. Now, I assume that you enjoy that quite a bit.
Yeah. In fact, Linda and I were having a conversation just the night after the Steel City Con was done, because that was a 3-day convention, and the guy that owns it now just believes in long hours. So Friday and Saturday, it's 10 a.m. to 8 p.m., and then Sunday, it's 10 a.m. to 5. And it's probably the longest hours of any show that I've done in the country. We were told, after Sunday night, and you're winding down from this long weekend, I said, I think what I still love most about the shows is it's like 2 days or 3 days of seeing a bunch of people, whether they're the actors signing or they're the fans, all on their best behavior. And it's like, where else can you get that?
Right.
But like, it's 3 days or 2 days of people acting as nicely as they can, and it's a great break from reality.
That does seem long, and some people might think, well, hell, all they're doing is sitting there and talking to people, but it's not really that, is it? It's the fact that you have to be on for that long.
Yeah, you have to. In the words of a Sony executive and the marketing executive that once commented on, when I was doing a series of Sony appearances for, I think they had a Seinfeld museum bus, and I did a bunch of cities for them. And sometimes, the hours would be really long because it was just a lineup of a lot of people. And the guy said, I see you treat the last fan the same way you treated the first fan. And I said, well, thank you for noticing, because that's what you have to do. And it's not that it's easy, because you're exhausted, and you'd like to kind of slough off and just go, yeah, hi, how you doing? And you really can't. You gotta, the very last person that comes to you at the last end of the day, you gotta go, hey, how are you? Good to see you. Thanks for coming, Actually, Barbara Eden taught me that, because when we were on tour with the female version of The Odd Couple, it was the female version of The Odd Couple starring Barbara Eden. So she was the figurehead. And at the end of every performance, evening performance, about 11:30, we'd all get out of the theater, and she would just begin at that moment to sign autographs for everyone that lined up at the stage door. So here she was with the biggest role in the play, and we'd all go back to the hotel and, have a martini and go to our hotel rooms, and she would stay there till the very last person online, got seen. And we were in an airport one morning having breakfast, and I said, Barbara, I am so impressed that you do that you stay there. I know how exhausted you must be. And she just looked at me and she went, well, Larry, that's my job.
That is very interesting. What a great little story.
Mm-hmm. I learned a lot from her, just from that tour, because at the time, I wasn't in that play because I had been the soup Nazi. In fact, they didn't even want to see me at first, because I didn't quite fill the physical thing they were looking for.
Right.
But my manager convinced them to see me, and it was a matter of doing a Castilian accent, with the lisping. Neil Simon just wrote something that could not be screwed up and would get laughs no matter what the actor did. But it was a matter of being able to handle that accent. So when I went in there and read, then they called my manager and they said, yeah, nobody did that accent as good as he did it. So he's definitely one of the brothers, and now we just have to find the other one. And I only got it because I could do that. It wasn't, nobody cared that I was the soup Nazi, because they had Barbara Eden, they had Georgia Engel, from the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
Right.
So they had bigger people than me anyway. So I was really just in it as an actor, as a cast member. And little by little, the producers started to realize that there was a little bit of stuff they could get out of me, because Barbara would get so many early morning radio show offers in every town we went to, and we did at least like 48 cities. And sometimes she couldn't do two at the same time or whatever. And they would say, well, I hear you have the soup Nazi in the cast. And they'd go, yeah. And they'd go, can he come in? And they'd ask me, and I'd go, yeah, sure. So, I began to be second or third string radio interview guy, And then I would always, my partner, David, I would always say, can I take David with me so we could play the characters a little bit? And he got a kick out of it because he didn't really have any name cachet. He was just a good actor. So he kind of got a kick out of doing these early morning radio shows and having, because they're fun. Those DJs.
They are.
have a lot of fun.
You mentioned accents. I mean, you have done a lot of accents in your career.
Mm-hmm.
How do you approach an accent as an actor? I mean, how does that process start?
Well, when I had my very first like acting 101 classes when I was 21 years old in Valley College in LA, you were required to take voice and diction. And the teacher just immediately looked at me and he goes, with a face like yours, it would be really good if you can do accents.
Was that a compliment or?
It was just a reality. He just goes, you don't look quite American, but you look like you could be anything from Greek to Italian to Middle Eastern to whatever.
Right.
And I said, I'm really Russian. And he said, well, you don't look, most Russians are kind of fair haired with blue eyes, but he goes, you could do that too. And so, I started to pay attention to voice and diction and phonetics, but I found in the practical world, the best way to do it is to find a real person or even an actor that actually has that accent and just imitate them, and then you can check that against their dialect. Like I've got a 3 CD set of just about every dialect known to mankind by, dialect experts. And I'll check it against that, but I'll always first try to imitate someone who really speaks that language, who's trying to speak English. And of course, the most famous one is the Soup Nazi was actually nothing more than an impression of Omar Sharif.
No kidding. Now that's interesting.
When I got that audition, I got it at like 7:30 p.m. and I was supposed to be there at 10 a.m. the next morning. And it was really, they weren't sure if they were going to do that episode because it was written by like a first-time Seinfeld writer, but they wanted to see if they could pin down that character. And so they didn't even like send you any scenes. They just said the character's called the Soup Nazi and we want a Middle Eastern accent. So I went home and I just thought, well, the first thing, since there are no scenes for me to rehearse with, I need to get that accent. And I had Lawrence of Arabia on videotape. And I just started fast forwarding to the first Omar Sharif scene. And he's in the desert with Peter O'Toole and some others. And they're riding horses. And Omar Sharif says, "You're drifting, Lawrence. Stop drifting. Be warned." And I went, okay, that's the accent.
That's it.
And I just, imitated that as best I could. Then improvised a little bit. And then the next day when I went in there, I just used that accent and got me a call back. So I decided not to change anything. And no one ever said a word about my accent through the filming and the rehearsing and the filming. So it stayed. So it's truly an imitation of Omar Sharif from beginning to end.
Wow. That is really interesting.
The long, funny story, which is in my book, there's a chapter in my book, Confessions of a Soup Nazi, an Adventure in Acting and Cooking, which is kind of a half-acting memoirs mixed with recipes that had something to do with where I was at that time as an actor.
Oh, how smart. And, how smart that is. That's great.
It's a fun book. I wanted to call it an adventure in acting and cooking, but the publishers made me throw in Confessions of a Soup Nazi so it would actually sell. But there's a whole long chapter called My Seinfeld Experience and the Mulligatawny Soup. And in the Seinfeld Experience chapter, it's a very long story about how I ended up in the producer's office, actually, competing with a late great character actor named Richard Libertini, who people will remember from all kinds of films like All of Me with Lily Tomlin and Steve Martin, where he was the Indian guru running around with the bowl, going, "Edwina, back in bowl, Edwina, in bowl." And so he had this history of doing these characters, and it came down to me and him, and it was nerve-wracking,
Sure.
But it's such a long story that got me there, because it started way back in my acting class with Jeffrey Tambor giving me this big compliment and a monologue I did, and And then my acting class buddies were going, "You've got to get him to do something for you." And I went, "He did something for me. He complimented me." In my neighborhood, when a guy compliments you, you don't go, "Thanks, can I have $5?" So, but they made me ask a favor of him. And so the favor I asked was, "Can you introduce me to the guy that's casting the Larry Sanders Show?" And it just turned out that he was also casting Seinfeld. And I had a really good interview with him based on the fact that my day job was being a bail bondsman, and he had never heard that one before. So I got to entertain him a little bit, so we really never even talked about acting until the thing was over. And as I was leaving, he said, "Oh, your resume says you do all these dialects." And I said, "Yeah, with a face like this, you kind of have to be prepared." And he goes, "Good, because I also cast Seinfeld, and we often need, different ethnic street characters that are, in New York." And I said, "Hey, man, favorite show, so, whatever." And yeah, a couple of weeks went by. So the agent I did have, which I referred to back in those days, I'm sure they're still around, as warehouse agents, meaning they take any actor in town on. They take all your pictures, they stick them in a warehouse and completely forget about you. And then if you go out and hustle yourself a job, the way it used to work, maybe still does, is when you get SAG minimum, the producers actually pay the agent over the top, the 10%. So it doesn't even come out of your pay. It doesn't start to come out of your pay until you negotiate more than minimum. And so it was a really kind of sleazy, symbiotic relationship where it didn't cost you anything, if you got yourself a job. Like, they wouldn't give you the 10%, so it would just be non-existent. And the agents didn't do anything for you, but you had their logo on your resume, so you didn't have to put your home phone number on there. So it was kind of necessary. But the agent I did have did get the call from the casting office, and he knew he didn't send me up for Seinfeld,
Right.
Which he was so shocked that they called him for me. And when he called me that night, and this went through every call I got from him, from that to the call back to when he had to tell me that I was hired, he always sounded like he had just seen, Casper the Ghost. "Larry, this is Mike. You're your agent." And I go, yeah, I know you, Mike. And he'd go, "I just got a call from Seinfeld, and they want to see you. I didn't submit you for it." And I went, "Mike, you probably shouldn't tell me that. I might think that you're doing something for me, but yeah, I know where that came from." And, he goes, "Oh, they want to see you 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. The character's called the Soup Nazi, and they don't have anything on paper, but they need you to prepare a Middle Eastern accent." They weren't specific on what region. And I went, "Okay, cool." Unbeknownst to me, well, actually, the after the pre-read, the associate casting director named Brian Myers, who later was the casting director on Just Shoot Me, he actually said something to me that, in my limited experience with professional television, was actually really good news, but I didn't know it. But he offered me information about the project, which, I learned later on that if, in the pre-read, if they tell you anything like, "Okay, well, we'll be looking at people for a week," or, and anything rather than, "Hey, thanks for coming in," is a good sign. And he did say something to me about, "We might be on a little hiatus, but, we'll let you know."
Right.
And so I left there, and the hiatus turned out to be almost 3 weeks. So I was sure I didn't get the part, but then, of course, almost 3 weeks later, I get a call from that same agent, same voice, "Larry, it's your agent, Mike." And I'd go, "Yeah, I remember you, Mike." And I'd go, "Didn't you audition for Seinfeld a few weeks ago?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "They want to see you again?" And I finally had to say, like, Mike, can you stop ending every sentence in a question mark? It's beginning to hurt my feelings, you know. And so he told me, you know, where to go, and I went. And of course, that, you know, competition was crazy, and the audition was crazy. It was one of the craziest mornings of my life. But somehow, and I have found out in the years since exactly how, I ended up getting the job. So it wasn't the agent that really had anything to do with it. He just accepted phone calls. You know, then when they called him and said, well, we want to hire your client, he called me with that same voice and told me that I needed to go to Soundstage 9 at 1 p.m. And because they literally cast the same day they auditioned. I think there was just a big thing about they were very unsure about actually spending time on that script, because Spike, who wrote it, he was a Letterman staffer and he got hired on Seinfeld, but I don't know if he had ever written a solo script before. He might have. He was very young. And, you know, the Soup Nazi, the reason he wrote it is because the Letterman writers would get soup from this guy, Al Yeganay, who was around the corner on 55th from the Ed Sullivan Theater, which was on Broadway and 54th. And they nicknamed him the Soup Nazi because he literally had footsteps on the sidewalk where you had to step up and you know. And then I finally found out many years later, actually working behind the counter for fun, that the menu is not painted, but it's stuck on the glass next to the cash register. So if you order your food and stand there, you're blocking the menu of the soups of the day from everybody else. You have to step to the left. And people always thought that was some random bit of comedy, but there was actually a practical reason for it. Yeah, so I ended up with that, and of course, it changed my life.
Yeah, it seems to be one of those iconic characters that just will not die, right? It'll outlive you, Larry.
I fear and hope it will. You know, I don't know what my acting career would have been like had I not done that, because it wasn't going very well. I mean, I was in it like almost 18 years, and all I was doing was beg, borrow, and steal theater around LA, and luckily had this really good day job as a bail bondsman and a court investigator.
I'm glad
I was surviving.
I'm glad you came back to that, because I was going to come back to that.
Yeah. Well, you know, I cannot tell you through the years of acting class after acting class, all the talented young people I saw that they just had to drop out of the business because they either got married early and had, you know, kids, or they had parents that were breathing down their necks. And, you know, it was like, get a decent job, you know, and most decent full-time jobs would not allow you to do what you had to do to be an aspiring actor. So yeah. For some, it was one or the other.
True.
And I was just lucky because that job, I was basically out in the field investigating court cases where my company had bail bonds on. And I would take notes, and I'd be the go-to guy where if a bail bondsman, you know, would call me and say, hey, this guy's, you know, this bail jumper has like a week or two to go. Have you seen anything in the files? You know, and if I did see anything, I'd send him a card, and I'd go, your defendant was arrested in Yolo County on a separate charge. So, you know, go up and get him. So that's basically what I did. And then I also got a bail agent's license so that off hours I could run to courts at all hours of the night and get paid extra money for posting bonds. It was a really great job because I was always out on the road. And if I got an audition, I could go to it.
I want to circle back to something else you said, because I think it's fairly a common story where you get representation, but that's not the end of it, is it? It's still up to you to get out there and hustle. At least the people who seem to make something happen.
I cannot tell you, the couple of times, you know, through the years, And mostly it was when I was going to college. One time later on down the line, I went to collect unemployment, and they had a horrible problem understanding that there was a union out there that did not get their union members work.
Right.
You're a Teamster, you're IATSE, IATSE is everybody else, stagehands, wardrobe, makeup, and they actually would send you up for jobs. But the Screen Actors Guild and AFTRA, they were the only two like actual unions or guilds that did not help you in any way, shape, or form to get a job. Their only function was to make sure you got paid and that the contracts were good. No actor ever gets a call from his union that says, "Hey, I got some work for you." So unemployment had a terrible time figuring that out. Like, well, what did your union do for you this week? And it's like, nothing, because I didn't work, and they couldn't understand why they don't get you work like every other union on the face of the earth.
Right.
So yeah, it's the life of an actor is a really bizarre entity in society, because society doesn't have any kind of rules for that. For a person that has a career, but nobody helps you get any work, unless, of course, you had a good agent. But if you had a good agent, you'd be working all the time anyway.
Right.
So many actors don't have good agents and don't work, but they really are out there pursuing it, blood, sweat, and tears. But that doesn't really count to state agencies. Like, a really good example was one time one of the many times I got called in for jury duty, and that was the biggest fear I ever had. Not that it wouldn't be interesting to do it sometime, but as an actor, you have to be available for a call late at night, like the Soup Nazi call, and you got to get in there the next morning.
Sure.
So if you're on a jury, you can't just, one jury member just didn't show up. But to give up any opportunity, you could be giving up a series that could employ you for the next 9 years. So when I get up to say to the judge, I really can't do this because I'm an actor and I don't know when I'm going to get called in on something, but if I do, and if I can't go, I could be blowing an opportunity to have employment for years to come.
Right.
And he'd go, well, what's your audition schedule? And I would go, I'm sorry, Your Honor, that's the point. There is no schedule. I have no idea when some casting director out there is going to see my picture and go, oh, he looks right for this.
Yeah.
You're the last to know. You don't know anything. And then when you do audition, you may get a call back, but you don't know that you're going to get a call back until you get it, because they don't give feedback. They don't call your agent and go, hey, Larry did really well. The two answers that most people are used to in life, yes and no. As an actor, it's yes or ignore.
Yeah.
There's no, there's no he didn't get it until you're watching the TV show one night and you see somebody playing your part. So yeah, the whole agent, Screen Actors Guild, which is now SAG-AFTRA, that finally merged the television. They used to have, like, if you did a show that was filmed with videotape, you would be AFTRA. And if you did a show that was filmed with film, you'd be SAG. But if you did a show with videotape, but they were using a soundstage on a film lot, like Warner Brothers, then it was SAG. So it was crazy, to know, well, which union is going to be handling this? And finally, back in the, it was the early 2000s, I think, there was this big drive towards merger. And there were technically reasons why some people were against it, because some actors were working only SAG, and they didn't want to be lumped in with, anchormen and broadcasters.
Okay.
And there were some actors that were bouncing back and forth between soap operas and episodics. So their money they earned was being split right in half. And so they couldn't make the medical insurance on either one of them, because all their work was being split between the two. So I fell under that category of wanting them to merge. One of the big proponents against the first merger, which, breaks my heart because he's beloved by both you and me, Ed Asner, was leading the charge not to merge. And they didn't the first time. And then they took it to a vote again the following, year. And then it passed, thank God. But, we both have this great love for Ed because we both worked with him. Mm-hmm. He was one of the greatest people I ever worked with.
That's what can you say?
Yeah.
He'd been in the business forever.
Yeah. And he didn't look down on any actor, either on the set with him. I happen to have done 2 staged readings with him here in LA. He was just fabulous. I mean, he would not upstage you ever, even though his timing was such that every word he said was funny, even just reading out of the script. But he would give you your moments. And I got to do it twice with him, and it was astounding. He was something else.
Yeah, quite an honor to be working with certain people that you admire in the business. I've had conversations with people I greatly admire, like certain directors that I look up to, and they don't actually necessarily have to be like super well-known people, just people that I admire their work. Because for me, the work is what counts. I don't get super starstruck a lot, but the people who I do get starstruck from are not the people you would think. They're the people that I just personally have a fascination with.
Yeah, to me, it's people ask me that, and I always say it's a level of admiration. It's the last Steel City Con. I looked at all the people that were going to be there, and of course it was really cool because Wayne Knight was doing his first con, and so when I came in, I knew that they were going to pair us off with professional photographs, and I love Wayne. I worked with him very briefly in my episode of the show, but we used to both shop in Burbank, and we'd bump into each other in the supermarkets and just get into conversations about what's going on and the business, and people would walk by with their shopping carts just with the weirdest looks, like, okay, the Soup Nazi and Newman are standing there talking with shopping carts. So I love Wayne, and I already knew him. So there were 3 people I had never met that I was anxious to meet, only because I had something to say to them, and they had inspired me at a certain time. And one of them, the main one, was Edward James Olmos, because when I was first in college theater, one of the teachers had an extra ticket to Zoot Suit at the Mark Taper Forum. And he goes, Larry, come with me to see this show. You need to get out and see more theater. Because I hadn't seen a lot of theater, in my life. And so I went with him. And of course, I was just killed by Edward James Olmos as El Pachuco in that. He was I remember saying to my teacher, so this is what I have to try to be able to do, right? He's going, well, if you can get to that level, but then I also wanted to meet Mark Lynn Baker because besides the fact that I've probably seen My Favorite Year 100 times or more, there was this moment he had with Lainey Kazan on the phone when she goes, take Alan Swan to Brooklyn. And he goes, Brooklyn? And she goes, yeah, what are you ashamed of? And he goes, everything. And so I adopted that as my catchphrase whenever anyone would say to me, like, what are you ashamed of? And I'd go, everything. So I wanted to tell him that I was always imitating him, and he was really cool. And Edward James Olmos he actually put his hand on his heart and just went, oh, you made my day, And
That's great.
And then there was Danny Trejo was there, and who doesn't want to meet Danny Trejo, right?
For sure.
It's like, you're so much fun to watch, and I've had tacos and beer at your restaurant, It's usually admiration that...
Agreed, 100%, 100%. I had an interview with Joe Estevez a few days ago, and I'm always a big fan of Joe's. He's just such a genuine person. I love working with him, and every once in a while I'll ask him, like, Joe, why do you not do conventions? You would kill at conventions. This guy, according to the IMDb, has done over 300 films, and some of them are kind of like cult classics. But I think that I might have him kind of thinking about it a little bit, you know?
I hope so, because, besides the fact that I've been, lucky enough to work with him on a couple of your films, a couple of Katrine McGregor's films that she produces and casts out of Boise, and she's put us in a couple of the same projects. But one time she came to LA and had kind of a acting workshop thing, and she asked both Joe and I to speak. And I loved what he said. He goes, I don't have to work on the level of my brother. He goes, I just work all the time, and I love every second of it. And I am just a happy and fulfilled man because I just get to do my trade all the time. I heard that, and I thought, wow, that is so nice.
Yeah. Yeah, he said something to me similar, personally. Yeah.
Because as you know, every time we've worked with him, he gives 110%.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And
sometimes more than that.
Yeah. But you could see the joy in him,
Right. Speaking of some of the other roles that you've done, a lot of people do know you from that role, but of course you worked all the time for many years. That role opened up a lot of doors for you. What are some of your other favorite roles that you've had over the years that you really like, the character, you really wanted to dig into?
Well, I think my favorite single character that I've gotten to play was, I once had a chance to do the play version of Nuts. And the character I played, which was actually played by Richard Dreyfuss and Barbara Streisand's film of it, was nothing like, I'm not sure whose idea it was to water him down so much. Because, in the film with Streisand, he's sort of like a humble public defender. But in the actual play, that character, he's like a really sharp, mean criminal lawyer who has been hired by this prostitute in a competency hearing because her parents want her committed to hide the fact that her stepfather molested her. And she takes all the money she earned and she hires this super sharp criminal attorney who pretends to not know what he's doing until he nails you. And there was nothing more fun than playing that game, with the witnesses.
Wow.
And in fact, it was just so much fun to do that I actually went into real life Superior Court over an old car crash thing that the guy that hit my car didn't want to pay, and I had beaten him twice in small claims court, and he never did give me the money. I had sold the car. All of a sudden, while I'm in rehearsals for this play, I get this summons to Superior Court. Now he and his insurance company are taking me to Superior Court to try to get out of paying something that they never paid anyway.
Wow.
And luckily, in some files somewhere, I still had, unfortunately, the lower of the two estimates I got, but it was still an estimate for the damage on the car. And so I decided, just for the exercise, I'm going to go and represent myself. The thing I had learned from a lawyer I talked to when we were rehearsing was, she said, you never ask a question you don't know the answer to. I went in there, and the whole funny thing about this guy having hit my car, he hit my car, crunched in the front of my car, and then just left it parked, and whatever. He must have been like wasted or something. But in the morning, I went out, and my front end was smashed in, and I had an orange car, and the orange paint was all over the back of his bumper. Now we're in actual Van Nuys Superior Court, and he's got this lawyer from the insurance company. And his lawyer produces this witness, an eyewitness. And the eyewitness, the first thing I realized, had like the heaviest Philly accent I had ever heard. And I thought, this is interesting. And he told this tale of this mysterious blue Camaro that came racing. He was out walking his dog, came racing around the corner, hit my car on the driver's side door and drove it into the other guy's Jeep. As soon as I heard that, the one thing I knew from the estimate was there was no damage to the driver's side door. Instead of doing it the easy way, I thought, I'm doing this play. I want to practice this guy in real life. So I went up to him, I cross-examined him, and I said, so you were walking your dog that night, huh? And he said, yeah. And I said, how was the lighting on the street that night? Well lit? And he goes, yeah. And I said, and your vision, you have good vision, or do you wear glasses? And he goes, nope, 20/20 vision. I got 20/20 vision. I went, oh, that's nice to hear. And I said, so, you're walking your dog, great lighting, got 20/20 vision, and then you saw this blue Camaro come around the corner and hit the Carmen Ghia in the driver's door and drive it into the Jeep. And he goes, yeah, that's exactly what happened. And I said, and you're absolutely sure of that? Like, your memory is great? You're one of those people with a great memory? And he goes, memory like an elephant. And I went, okay, good. And then I just turned to the judge and I said, Your Honor, if you'll refer to the estimate from the body shop, there is no damage to the driver's side door on the Carmen Ghia at all. And the judge just laughed. He just let out a big laugh, and he awarded me the case. And the lawyer from the insurance company, that came up to me, couldn't even look at me in the face, just goes, I just need an address to send the check to. So I ended up getting $450 for a car that I had long since sold. It was fun to play the character in real life because I was doing it on stage. So I think, people don't know that character unless they ever actually saw the play. But that's the most fun character ever, because he would just play with people on the witness stand and pretend to be a totally different guy until he heard enough of what he needed to hear, and then he would just nail the person.
That does sound fun.
So that was fun. Soup Nazi was, one of the more fun parts and one of the more easy parts. Doing the Odd Couple tour and playing the Costas-Huela brothers being comic relief in a comedy was just guilty pleasure, because, we played like maybe 3,000 seat auditoriums and stuff all over the country. And David and I would come out and just start lisping and getting laughter. And that, it didn't really matter what else you did. You just lisped and they laughed. So that was kind of a guilty pleasure.
Funny how that works. Fun. Right.
Yeah. But I was telling you earlier, when we were chatting, that two of my favorite lines came from two of your films. And one of them was from Hacks.
Right.
When, the writer Byron, and I'm the hack director, and the writer Byron is trying to, take me to task for imitating the psycho shower scene. And, I turn to him and I say, Byron, a lot of directors can rip off the psycho shower scene, but how many directors have the balls to do it twice in one movie? And that just became one of my favorite things I ever got to say with a straight face, I think I was just telling somebody recently that I think it was at the convention, and they were going like, when did you figure out that No Soup for You was going to be like this hilarious line? And I go, I still haven't figured it out. I still haven't got the slightest idea what's funny about No Soup for You. I said, it's just, I said it got laughs, but when I approach comedy, I want to play it as seriously and as straight as possible, and I said, and if the line or the situation is funny, that will come out. But you don't want to muck it up with, comical behavior like Dustin Hoffman or Spencer Tracy, which are like my two favorite actors of all time. They're two guys that played every comedic scene seriously,
Sure.
And they just, absolutely. Everything Dustin Hoffman did in Tootsie was absolutely serious.
What a great performance.
If a year goes by, I realize I have the DVD. I have to sit and just watch it. And I just watch it by myself because I don't care what anybody else thinks. But not only an unbelievable performance, but, you know, the way he handled it, even in the presence of Bill Murray,
Right.
he just did everything. In fact, there's a line, I must have seen it like 7 days in a row in the movie theater back in 1983. And after Bill Murray goes, "You slut," you know, after the actor from the soap opera leaves,
Right.
the audience was always laughing so hard you never got to hear what Dustin Hoffman said next. But finally, after a bunch of times, I finally figured out that he says, "Rape is no laughing matter." And it's a great line, but no one ever could hear it. You know, and then I think my other favorite line that he gets to say in that movie, when Jessica Lange is saying, you're always honest, you're always straight with people, and he goes, "Well, in many ways, honesty is a relative term." And I always loved that. Whether that was Elaine May or Gelbart or...
That was a great impression too, by the way.
Oh, well, you know, I got to be on an airplane with him some years ago, and when I see a big celebrity on an airplane, I really don't have the guts to talk to them, so I write them a note. And I had already done it like twice, once to Julie Andrews and Blake Edwards, and once to Jessica Lange, oddly enough. But on this flight was Dustin Hoffman. And I asked the flight attendant, because I was in like premium economy, and of course he and his wife were in first class. And I said, if I wrote a note to Mr. Hoffman, would that be okay? And she, said, let me ask him. And she came back and she said, yeah, he would be glad to accept your note. So I wanted to tell him this story, and this was a true story. When Tootsie first came out, I would, go every day, every other day, but I would have to keep seeing that movie. And at the same time, I was doing this little showcase where a group of actors would get together, and we'd all kick in $10, and we'd all write a 3-minute scene. And then another person from one of the other scenes would direct your scene, and then you would in turn direct their scene. And then we'd have a night of, maybe 10 3-minute scenes, and we would take all that money and pay some casting person to come in and watch our scenes. I was seeing Tootsie like every day and whatever. And one day we were rehearsing the scene, and the guy that was directing that scene for me just stopped at the scene, and he goes, "Larry, you're going to have to stop imitating Dustin Hoffman." And so I actually wrote that in a note to Dustin Hoffman on the airplane, but then I put at the bottom, I said, to this day, it's still my favorite direction,
Oh, wow. Nice.
And what was really cool was after the flight, I had to go to the bathroom. And when I came out of the bathroom, he and his wife were like looking for something in the suitcase. And I kind of mustered up all my courage, and I said, "Thanks for accepting my note." And he looked up at me and goes, "Oh, you wrote that note, man. Very funny, man." And I was like, oh my God, how am I going to move my legs? How am I going to walk?
That's funny.
But that was really true. I mean, he's the kind of guy that every time I'd see him in a film, I would end up talking like that till somebody told me to stop.
I think that you're right in the fact that when you're trying to do something creative, if you are trying to think about it like, oh man, maybe this will make me some money, that is not the way to go about it. Right. It's whatever's inside you, whatever's been put inside you to be creative. I mean, you have to be true to that.
Mm-hmm.
So
you have to really amaze yourself.
Sometimes it's like someone else has written it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know there's a great quote from Larry David that said, if at least 10 people in Hollywood turn you down, you got something good. And I'm sure he's faced a lot of that through the years, and now no one will ever question anything he does again.
Right.
That's what acting used to be like prior to Seinfeld. I wrote in my book that prior to Seinfeld, one of the most uncomfortable moments for any actor would be when someone says, "What do you do?" And you would try to say anything except for "I'm an actor." Because if you said, "I'm an actor," they would invariably say, well, what have I seen you in?
Right.
You know, and I knew in my case I would be able to, you know, beyond without tears, I would be able to say nothing actually, you know, and they'd go like, why haven't you done anything? And I go, oh, I'm doing theater all the time, but there are usually 2 to 4 people in the audience, and I tend to memorize their faces, and you're just not one of them, you know.
Oh,
so
that's funny.
if you had seen me in something, I'd know you. You know?
I'm the same way. I'm the same way. When I tell people I'm a
very
filmmaker,
often the audience, yeah, and it's hard, you know, and very often the audience would outnumber the actors on stage, and at least we knew we could beat them in a fight, you know. but it's true when you do something, you do it as a professional, but if it just doesn't get out there and people don't see it, it's weird for you to say, this is what I do. You may not have seen anything, but I work very hard at it. And sometimes I come up with some really good stuff, you know.
Sure.
So but yeah, I guess I learned a long time ago to stop caring about who's seen your work.
Yeah.
And just, you know, thank God for IMDb, right?
Right.
You know, you could say, look me up on IMDb. You know,
true enough. Well, Larry, I really appreciate your time. This has been a great conversation. I always enjoy talking to you.
Yeah, my pleasure. And I always enjoy talking to you and working with you, and then at times getting to talk like you. You know.
Hey, so before I let you go, could I get, as a personal favor, could I get that iconic line?
Yeah. Nothing for you.
That's perfect. Larry, thank you so much, buddy.
You're welcome, John. I hope to see you soon.
Yes, absolutely. Talk to you soon.